The last time I saw Greg Sankey in person, he was all smiles. It was at the Hoover Met on Sunday, championship day at the SEC baseball tournament. He was handing out the trophy for the third time in 6 postseasons to Tim Corbin and the Vanderbilt Commodores as they earned the #1 overall seed in the SEC, or the NCAA baseball tournament, I should say, which will feature 13 teams from the SEC after they put 14 teams in the NCAA basketball tournament, and all seemed rosy. And then Greg Sankey went to the beach, and, well, it was no day at the beach, day after day, as all of a sudden he has become public enemy #1. He's become Darth Vader of the SEC's evil football empire. Welcome in, everyone. I'm Kevin Skarbinski. This is Scarbo Knows. So much to talk about after SEC spring meetings. And a lot of people have been doing a lot of talking about the SEC, about SEC football, and particularly about the commissioner, Greg Sankey. Let's look at Greg Sankey's week. You can boil it down to 3 tweets on Twitter/X. It started on Monday, Memorial Day, holiday for most people. Greg Sankey decided to meet the press when he got to Destin, and Andy Staples captured it well. I watched the video. Andy, of course, tweeted out, "Today was as pissed off as I've seen Greg Sankey in a public setting." Now, that says something, A, because it comes from Andy Staples, who's been following SEC football for a long time, former walk-on at the University of Florida under Steve Spurrier. He knows the territory. He knows the players. He knows the game. And he's been around Greg Sankey as long as Greg Sankey's been around the SEC, which goes back to about 2002 when Mike Slive hired him from the Southland Conference to help the SEC clean up its little issue with NCAA infractions. So Greg Sankey is known as very stoic, very stone-faced. He's very dry in his humor. He doesn't really show a lot of emotion, but it was clear he was angry when he met the press on Monday night in Destin before the SEC spring meetings really kicked off. And why he was angry, last week there were a couple of public comments. They weren't statements per se issued by the Big 12 or the ACC, but their commissioners, Brett Yormark from the Big 12 and Jim Phillips from the ACC, they issued public comments talking about this discussion about what is the next iteration of the college football playoff going to look like. Is it going to go to 16 teams? Are we going to have automatic bids per conference? Are the SEC and the Big 10 going to get 4 bids each, while the Big 12 and the ACC would get only 2 bids apiece? And then there would be 1 for the group of 5, #1 team in the rankings, and then 3 at-large bids. And each of those commissioners, Phillips from the ACC and Yormark from the Big 12, they used a phrase that clearly got under Greg Sankey's skin, and it was good of the game. In other words, we're trying to look out for the good of the game. And without saying it, they implied that perhaps the commissioner of the Southeastern Conference was not looking out for the good of the game, along with the commissioner of the Big Ten Conference, Tony Petitti, who has been invisible. His superpower must be invisibility, because Greg Sankey is taking all of the heat from people who are fans of ACC schools, Big 12 schools, Group of 5 schools, even Big 10 schools. Meanwhile, it's really the Big 10, get my numbers right, the Big 10 and the SEC that are in concert for the most part, although they kind of parted ways a little bit this week on their opinion about what that new 16-team playoff that's likely going to kick off in 2026 is going to look like. So Greg Sankey didn't like the implication that he was not looking out for the good of the game. But it only got worse. Brendan, if we could pop that graphic back up there with those tweets describing Greg Sankey's week, he's become an easy target, an obvious whipping boy, and he has taken shots all week long. And he was angry when the week started. And then people like Chuck Cooperstein, who is the radio play-by-play voice of the Dallas Mavericks in the NBA. Not sure why he's checking in on SEC football and Greg Sankey. That was from Friday. Greg Sankey is very close to nailing down a clear victory as the most annoying person in sports. Really? The most annoying person in sports? That is a long list of contenders for that title. And I don't think Greg Sankey makes the cut in the top 100 in that list. And then Stephen Godfrey, he's one of these hipper than thou media types. He's written for the Washington Post. He's done a Split Zone Duo podcast. And he always seems like he wants to be a little hipper than you or thinks he's hipper than thou. And he tweeted, this really got me. Greg Sankey's professional existence defines born on third, thinking you hit a triple. And I'll never understand the fealty in media coverage. Now, kudos for the use of the word fealty. I don't know how many people in the media are bowing down to Greg Sankey, are kneeling before him as if he were a king as such, which the word fealty would imply. But Greg Sankey, born on third base, thinking he hit a triple. Now, look, you are welcome. Anyone is welcome. I'm welcome. I've done it myself to take shots at Greg Sankey, to take issue with things that the SEC does, that its commissioner says. That is fair game. But can we do it with the facts? Can we at least be honest in our criticism? And suggesting that Greg Sankey, in this great big world of intercollegiate athletics, was born on third base is about as wrong as you can be as a media member making a public statement on your social media account. Let's look just for a second. And look, it's not my place to defend Greg Sankey. But when I see something that is so egregious and so wrong as that statement by Stephen Godfrey, that tweet by Stephen Godfrey, I can't stand by and I can't stay silent. So let's look at Greg Sankey's bio, if you will. Let's look at his path to becoming the SEC commissioner. After Roy Kramer and Mike Slive, let's look at where Greg Sankey has been in the world of intercollegiate athletics. He didn't start out as the commissioner of a Power 4 conference. Let's blow that up full screen there, Brendan. Thank you. He started in intercollegiate athletics. Well, he didn't start in intercollegiate athletics. He started in intramural sports at Utica College in upstate New York. Then he became director of compliance at Northwestern State University, which is a member of the Southland. He also was the head golf coach. Now, I don't know about you, but you'd be hard-pressed to name 3 college golf coaches. You probably can't even name the golf coach at your favorite school. Even if your favorite school is in the SEC and they just won a national championship, as Auburn did a year ago, you probably can't name the head coach there. I'll bet a lot of people on the Plains would struggle with that one. I don't know the name of the Auburn golf coach. Shame on me. That's where Greg Sankey started. And then he became assistant commissioner, associate commissioner, and then finally commissioner of the Southland Conference. Now, the Southland Conference includes schools like McNeese State. Now, again, these are not the privileged few. This is not LSU and schools like that. This is a Division I conference that does not play FBS football. It plays FCS football. It's football championship subdivision. They do have a playoff. They have had for a long time. The biggest name out of the Southland of late was Will Wade, former LSU basketball coach. He did a great job in 2 years at McNeese. And now that his old methods of operation, his old MO is perfectly legal, the way NCAA sports are played now, he was hired by NC State. He'll probably do a great job there. The dude can coach basketball. So that gives you a little sense of where Greg Sankey came from when Mike Slive, as I mentioned earlier, tapped him to become his right-hand man, first to help the SEC with its compliance issues. As you can remember, back in 2002, on consecutive days, this is hard to believe now, but on consecutive days, back when the NCAA enforcement staff and the infraction committee actually had teeth, and on back-to-back days, they hammered Alabama football and Kentucky football with serious probations and sanctions. That's why Greg Sankey came to the SEC in the first place. So the man was not born on third base in terms of his professional career. He has been in those dry, dusty, windowless meeting rooms, not at these swanky resorts where a lot of these meetings now take place. He's done the dirty work. He's done the homework in a lot of levels in intercollegiate athletics. So he has earned his place at the table now as the commissioner of the evil empire. So I guess that does qualify him as Darth Vader. But what is really, I think, hurting Greg Sankey, and he, of course, is taking all this heat because he's out there. He's the one stepping up to a podium. He's the one talking into microphones. He's the one discussing the issues that the Power Four conferences have to face. What is this new playoff going to look like? And he's doing this in large part. And there, of course, is, we call it a Power Four. It's really a Power Two. Let's be honest. There's the SEC and the Big Ten. Then draw a line. Then go down about 3 flights of stairs. Then get on an elevator and go to the basement, and you will find the ACC and the Big 12 in terms of college football. Just a fact, Danny Cannell, whether you like it or not. So Greg Sankey's the one out here discussing what is this new college football playoff going to look like. You know, it seemed like momentum was building, led by coming out of the Big Ten, even though Tony Petitti, the relatively new commissioner there, who did not work his way up through golf coach, assistant commissioner of the Southland Conference before he became commissioner of the Big Ten. He popped in from television, I think, a couple years ago. He's been silent. He hasn't been out there supporting Greg Sankey. He hasn't been out there advocating for this 4-4-2-2-1-3 model of a 16-team playoff that would give the Big Ten and the SEC 4 guaranteed spots every year, would give the ACC and the Big 12 2 guaranteed spots each year, 1 to the group of 5, highest ranked team, and then 3 at-large spots. That idea really came out of and has been a favorite notion of the Big Ten. And the SEC hadn't settled on that, but they seemed at least open to the idea. But Greg Sankey's talking about it. Tony Petitti's not. So who is getting the blowback on the notion? And look, I think it's a terrible idea. Let me just say this up front. Guaranteeing anyone but a conference champion a spot in a playoff does not make it a playoff. It makes it what college football has been in its postseason. It's an invitational. If you give 4 spots guaranteed to the Big Ten and 4 to the SEC, whatever numbers you use, give them 3, give them 2, give the Big 12 3, give the ACC 3. It's an invitational. It's not a playoff. So let's get that clear up front. So that, just on its face alone, that format is anti-competition. So it should be shot down and killed with fire. And another reason why, and I wrote this in a column in the Birmingham News, you can check that out online, al.com/sports, where I write 2 columns a week. Hope you'll check those out. One of the bad things about this expanded postseason, Nick Saban was on to this idea very early. He was very open about it. The bigger the postseason gets, the smaller the regular season shrinks. the less emphasis on the regular season. If you can lose 3 games and make it to a playoff, obviously every game in the regular season is not as important as it used to be. And picture this scenario. We are in a 16-team playoff, the 4-4, 2-2, 1-3 model. So if you're the SEC now, another idea that they've come up with, which I think also should be fired into the sun, is the idea of play-in games. So now we're not just going to have a conference championship game in Atlanta to decide the league champion, to order the 2 teams that are going to be in the playoff. No. We're going to play more games. We're going to have a triple header on conference championship weekend. We're going to send the 6th place team to play at the 3rd place team. We're going to send the 5th place team to play at the 4th place team. And the winners of those 2 games would earn the 2 other guaranteed spots beyond 1 and 2. Again, that's under that 16-team 4-4, 2-2, 1-3 model. So if they go that route, which I really hope they won't, it's going to water down the regular season even more. And it's going to lead to situations like this. You're going into the Iron Bowl. One of the games, and I would argue, having spent my entire professional life in the state of Alabama, the number 1 game that helped make SEC football what it is, the Alabama-Auburn game, especially when it's played in Auburn at Jordan-Hare Stadium, and Auburn Jesus takes the wheel. There's no telling what's going to happen. As bad as Auburn's been the last few years, and it's the worst stretch of football in Auburn history in decades, 4 or 5 decades. The last 2 times Alabama went to Auburn, they needed in 2021 against an Auburn team coached by Brian Harsin of all people. Alabama needed a 99-yard or thereabouts drive at the end of regulation, led by Bryce Young, his Heisman moment, if you will, just to tie the game and force overtime, which Alabama did win in 4 overtimes against a very poor Auburn team. And that was in 2021. And then 2023, Hugh Freeze's first year at Auburn, Alabama has a playoff team under Nick Saban. They go to Auburn, and they are losing in the final minute of the game. They're facing 4th and 31, 4th and goal from the 31, if you will. And Jalen Milroe throws a dart to Isaiah Bond in the corner of the end zone on a play that will forever be known as Gravedigger. It's actually the name of it in the Alabama playbook, or was at the time on the Nick Saban coaching staff. So those were epic, all-time great games, the kind of games that Daniel Moore turns into paintings. So that's the kind of game that made this sport in this conference great. But if we go to this 16-team playoff with 4 guaranteed spots, what if Alabama rolls into that game? They're already number 1 in the league. They've already clinched first place. They know they're going to play in the SEC championship game. They know they're going to be in the college football playoff. They have absolutely nothing to gain when they step on the field against their arch rival from across the state. Meanwhile, Auburn is on the fringe. They have a chance to get to that 6th place spot or that 5th place spot. So they have everything to play for in that game. And Kalen DeBoer has to make a decision. What do I do? My quarterback, say it's Ty Simpson down the road, Austin Mack, Keelan Russell, whomever. Maybe he's a little banged up from the previous week's game. Maybe I have to look at the bigger picture and decide I don't want to play my starting quarterback against Auburn because I want him to heal up either for the SEC championship game the next week, or maybe that doesn't mean as much as it used to. Maybe I give him a couple of weeks off. And so I have taken a pin and taken all the air out of the Iron Bowl. One team is doing everything it has to do to win. The other team is trying not to get anyone else hurt, so it will be at full strength or as close as possible when they get to the playoff. And you say, no, that would never happen. Really? Happens in the NFL all the time. Think about last year, last week of the regular season. A former Auburn quarterback, Bo Nix, with the Denver Broncos, having a wonderful rookie season, but the Broncos have to win that game to get in the playoffs. They are playing the Kansas City Chiefs. The Kansas City Chiefs don't have to win that game to get into the playoff. They've already clinched first place. They've already clinched home field advantage all the way through the AFC playoffs. So what do when they go to Denver on that last regular season weekend? They don't play Patrick Mahomes. They don't play Jason Kelsey. They don't play their starters, Travis Kelsey, which is one of the Kelseys, the one that plays tight end. Dated Taylor Swift, apparently, allegedly, according to the tabloids for a long time. I don't pay attention to that kind of stuff. So excuse me if I'm not up on my pop culture. So the Chiefs, they trot out their JV team. their taxi squad team, as it used to be known, and they get run 38-0 by the Denver Broncos because they have to win. They win and they're in. They're in the playoff. So that exact scenario, or a very similar set of circumstances, is going to happen to the Iron Bowl at some point. Maybe it flips. Maybe Auburn's the team that's already in. Maybe Alabama's scratching to get in. But it's going to happen. And when it happens, that's going to be the next step in the decline of college football. Because the more you water down the regular season, the more you take away from what made college football what it is, that made it so attractive to television, that started television networks throwing all this money at the SEC and the Big Ten, more so than the other conferences. So why would you step on that tradition? Why would you do anything to damage that feeling that people get when they walk into Jordan-Hare Stadium or they walk into Bryant-Denny Stadium and they know that Alabama's coming to town in Auburn, or Auburn's coming to town in Alabama, and you don't know what you're going to see? You might see a kick six. You might see a comeback. You might see the greatest comeback you've ever seen. You might see something you've never seen before. You're going to feel something special as a fan of one or both of those teams at some point during that game. And then for the next 365 days, each fan base is going to feel something very, very strong, for better or worse. So this playoff has a great potential to just stomp all over that and basically spit all over that. So that's enough of a rant on that. So Greg Sankey now and the SEC, though, it seems like from this week at spring meetings, they have backed off from this idea of guaranteed spots, 4-4, 2-2, 1-3. And there was a lot of discussion in Destin about a 5-11 model. 5 guaranteed conference champions, the 4 in the Power 4, well, the top 5 ranked in the final college football playoff rankings, the top 5 ranked conference champions. 4 of them will be from the Power 4, and 1 will be from the Group of 5, as we had last playoff with Boise State, the first 12-team playoff. So that's become kind of a talking point. The Big 12 commissioner, Brett Yormark, has come out publicly in favor of that. I'm not sure why. He probably would be better off. His league would probably be better off if they had 2 guaranteed spots, because there are years, if you go back, and I did this exercise some time ago, a couple of weeks ago for a column, that if you look at the final rankings of the College Football Playoff Committee going back to 2014, the first year of the 14 playoff, and you put the teams then in the leagues they're in now, and you did it by ranking, there were years when the Big 12 would not have had 2 teams in the playoff. There were years the ACC would not have had 2 teams in the playoff. There was a year the SEC, if you went straight rankings, would have had 7 teams in the college football playoff and 6 teams in the college football playoff. So, and also that format is bad for the SEC because it limits the possibilities. That's why I think you've seen momentum coming out of Destin for, hey, wait a minute, we need more at-large spots because we're going to populate that top 16 in the final rankings with more teams most years than any other conference, including the Big Ten. Some years the Big Ten might have 1 or 2 more, some years the SEC. So that's another reason why I think you've seen the SEC shift away from the guaranteed automatic bids, the multiple automatic bids model, to the let's have more at-large spots model, the 511, as it's being called right now. But here's something that I'm going to take issue with Greg Sankey and the SEC that they did as they wrapped up their meetings in Destin. I'm still scratching my head about it. They put out a PowerPoint presentation, if you will. Brendan, let's look at the cover of their their PowerPoint presentation in Destin. And I'm surprised. We haven't seen this online. I'm surprised. They haven't. The conference has not tweeted it out. They have not placed it on their website. But we got a lot of screenshots. Let's go full screen with that so people can read. This is the slide 1 of this SEC PowerPoint presentation, making the case that SEC football is different from Big Ten football, ACC football, Big 12 football, that it's just, well, it just means more. It just means a tougher regular season gauntlet. Love the use of the word gauntlet. No other conference has a regular season as grueling as the SEC's. Now, look, if you've been following college football for any length of time, you know that's the case. Whether you want to admit it or not, whether you're Danny Cannell or whether you're Stephen Godfrey or whether you're Chuck Cooperstein or you're any of these folks, or Ari Wasserman has been very vocal from On3 this week, Andy Staples' partner on the podcast they do for the On3 network. They've all been very vocal about putting the SEC in its place. So why, if you're the SEC, you have your track record. You have all those national championships. You have all those programs within your league winning national championships. The Big Ten can't say that. That's Ohio State and Michigan the last 2 years. And yes, the SEC did not have a team in the national championship game for 2 straight years. That's hardly a long slog through the desert, okay? Also coincided with the retirement of the greatest college football coach we've ever known, certainly I've ever dealt with, and that's Nick Saban. So a little transition there at the marquee program in the SEC. So it's not like the sky is falling in the SEC. But by putting out this PowerPoint, and they had, I don't know how many pages it was, but it had a whole lot of data. It had strength of record data. It had strength of schedule data, all to make the point that playing 8 SEC conference games, that's another subject up for discussion. Will they go to 9? Will they stay at 8? The Big Ten plays 9. Why did they feel the need to put out all of this data in this document to show people that, yeah, we didn't win the national championship the last 2 years. We didn't put a team in the national championship game the last 2 years. We only had 3 teams in the first 12-team playoff. The Big Ten had 4. But we're still the top dog when it comes to college football. That it's harder to go through an SEC football schedule than it is a Big Ten football schedule or a schedule in any of the other conferences. If you look at it objectively over time, and you are not blinded by your bias to one conference or another because of your loyalty and love for one school or another, you know that's the case. You know that playing back-to-back SEC games is more difficult than playing back-to-back Big Ten games. Look at what Alabama did. And let's be honest. Kalen DeBoer's first Alabama team was the weakest Alabama team since Nick Saban's first year in Tuscaloosa in 2007. Without a doubt. No question. No argument. Went 9-3 in the regular season. Lost to the Vanderbilt team that lost to Georgia State, a 6-6 Vanderbilt team, and gave up 40 points to the Commodores in Nashville. Diego Pavia went nuts. Gotta love that guy. Glad we get to see him another season. Then Alabama loses to the Tennessee team, a good Tennessee team, not a great Tennessee team, but a good Tennessee team that lost at Arkansas. And worst of all, that Alabama team went to Norman, Oklahoma. They got a bit of a break by playing Oklahoma rather than Texas in its first year in the league. Obviously, there was no comparison between the Longhorns and the Sooners last year when it came to college football. But Alabama still in contention for a playoff berth, still inside the cut line, if you will. They go to Norman, and they lose 24-3. They score 3 points with Jalen Milroe and Ryan Williams and the weapons that they had. An Oklahoma team that would go on to lose its bowl game to Navy. So the worst, objectively speaking, Alabama football team since 2007 that went 9-3 overall. They went to Camp Randall Stadium in Madison, Wisconsin in September. And they jumped around, through, over, on Wisconsin. I forget the final score, but it was pretty ugly. They absolutely dominated. I know that wasn't a great Wisconsin team, but Wisconsin's one of the better programs in the Big Ten. And Alabama kicked them in the teeth early and often, all day long. So we know that an SEC schedule is more difficult than a Big Ten schedule. But for the SEC to feel compelled to put out this PowerPoint, to throw all these numbers out there, to reinforce that point, to me, was not the greatest PR move they've ever made. They didn't really need to do that. They can shut everyone up by what they do on the field this year. And before we go, I want to share a couple of things with you. Who these teams are playing, all right, we can argue about conference schedule, but non-conference schedules. Let me just throw these at you. Penn State got to the playoff last year, got to the semifinals, had a great season. James Franklin was at the SEC baseball tournament in the Vanderbilt dugout cheering on his buddy Tim Corbin from Franklin's days at Vanderbilt. They became very close. Penn State, of course, the Big Ten, as they like to tell you, they only play 3 non-conference games. Penn State, you know who Penn State's playing out of conference this season? Nevada, Florida International, and Villanova. Indiana, of course, played 3 dogs with fleas last year, and it worked out so well for the Hoosiers. They're doing it again. They're playing Old Dominion, Kennesaw State, and Indiana State. Oregon, Montana State, Oklahoma State, solid. Oregon State, rivalry game. Okay, give them that. Ohio State is playing Texas in Columbus, and then they play Grambling in Ohio. Meanwhile, the Alabama program in year 2 under Kalen DeBoer is playing at Florida State to open the season. And I know how bad Florida State was last year, and I know Alabama was mediocre last year, but that's a quality road game to start the season. You got to expect the Seminoles will be much better this season. And then they welcome Wisconsin to Tuscaloosa. So they're playing 2 Power 4 non-conference games, one of them on the road. Georgia plays at Georgia Tech, of course. Georgia Tech almost took out the Bulldogs last year. Heck of a game. Tennessee, which was in the playoff last year, they play Syracuse in Atlanta. Syracuse quietly had a very nice season last year. And Texas, which of course made the playoff as well last year, they go to Ohio State. So the SEC doesn't have to blow its own horn. The SEC doesn't have to put out a PowerPoint presentation demonstrating that it plays the toughest regular season schedule year in and year out. Facts are facts. Of course, people get very emotional about college football. They don't deal in facts, they deal in feelings. And the feeling across the country is that Greg Sankey somehow is ruining, destroying college football. I've seen all kinds of hyperbolic words thrown out as to what Sankey is allegedly doing to the sport that we all love. But I'm going to tell you what Greg Sankey's real problem is. Brendan, we've got one more graphic to get to before we leave. I want to show you a picture of the last 3 SEC commissioners. Of course, there was Roy Kramer there in the center. He was a grandfather of sorts, if you will. Roy was tough as nails, former football coach. He did so many great things for the conference. Some things people would disagree with, but he certainly moved the conference to a new place. And he was followed by Mike Slive. And Mike Slive was like everybody's grandfather. Everybody who's been around the SEC for any period of time remembers Mike Slive playing with his granddaughter, Abigail, at SEC football media days or SEC basketball media days. And Mike, he was a bit of a leprechaun. He had this way about him that as he was tough as nails behind closed doors, but in public, he was a very warm figure, a very personal figure. And then we come to Greg Sankey. Greg is not Roy Kramer. He's not a former football coach from Maryville, Tennessee. He's not Mike Slive, although they both are from upstate New York. But he doesn't have that huggable quality that Mike Slive had. May Mike rest in peace. Mike and I became good friends later in his life, and I feel very fortunate that I got to become a friend of Mike, call myself a friend of Mike Slive's before he passed, and a friend of the family's as well. But Greg Sankey is younger. He's not as young as he used to be. None of us are. I think he's 60 now. He'll turn 61, I believe, in August. But he has a different demeanor about him. And so it's easier, I think, to take shots at Greg Sankey than it was at Mike Slive or Roy Kramer, just because he's got a different personality, because he is generally stoic and dry in his sense of humor. So go ahead, Big Ten. Go ahead, ACC. Go ahead, Big 12. Group of 5. Notre Dame. Whoever you want to be. Whoever you are. Go ahead and take shots at Greg Sankey. Go ahead and mock the SEC because it hasn't won a football championship in, the horror, 3 years. Have your fun while you can. Because having spent my entire professional career in this part of the country, having gained an education in Southern football at the hand of Pat Dye, who was the Auburn football coach when I started my career as a beat writer for the Birmingham News covering the Auburn Tigers, I can tell you this. The SEC will be back. The SEC is not going away. However many teams you want to put in the playoff, whatever format you want to construct the playoff into, the SEC will figure it out. Kirby Smart, Steve Sarkisian, Lane Kiffin, Kalen DeBoer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those guys will be front and center when we get to the next iteration of the playoff. And some of them will be front and center when we finish off the 12-team playoff era of 2 years starting in December. SEC football will not stay down for long. But we've got to get out of here. We've been here long enough. I'm Kevin Skarbinski. I really appreciate you listening, watching. Scarbo knows. You can follow me on Twitter/X at Kevin Skarbinski. Check out my website, kevinskarbinski.com. And let's say thank you, special thank you to executive producer Brendan Martin here on the SEC Sideline Sports Network. He is the best in the business. No one's taking shots at him. All right. Hope everyone has a great weekend. We'll be back next time on Scarbo Knows.